Thank you all. Lunchtime learners, welcome, welcome. We have just a few announcements. Bright and early on Saturday morning, March 19th, we're going to be hosting Share the Trail Day, using the opportunity to teach our visitors about trail etiquette. So stop by those that are staffing and say hello, and then help them to spread the word so we can keep our preserve safe and enjoyable for everyone. In case you haven't heard, the Conservancy has a new home, and I know many of you have had an opportunity to see it and to help them settle in. But in case you haven't, there's going to be an official open house on Wednesday, March 23rd, noon to 1:30. So I hope I'll see you all there then. Our next Lunch and Learn is going to feature Steve Jones talking about wildflowers. And let's hope there's a lot to talk about. You know, I think we've seen some of our favorites poking their heads up, so hopefully we'll have a really good season. And then, if you will, mark your calendar for our Stewart Award recognition dinner on April 4th at 5 o'clock at the Homestead. Details should be coming out shortly. We may be, restricted to numbers, not sure what the COVID restrictions will be at that time. So before I get to the main event here, I just want to remind everyone, if you have questions for Dave, feel free to put them in the chat, and then we'll try to get to everybody at the end of his presentation. So the city of Scottsdale has more critical wildfire risk than any other valley city, mostly due to urban interfacing with much of the preserve and the preserve's ever-increasing grasslands. To this end, in January of 2021, they wisely added Dave Ramirez to their staff. Dave was born and raised in Montana. He's an avid outdoorsman and loves wild, pristine places, which is why he was so drawn to the Sonoran Desert and the McDowell-Sonoran Preserve. Before becoming the city's community wildlife mitigation coordinator, he worked for the U.S. Forest Service as a division chief on the Tonto National Forest, where he was responsible for the fire and fuels management of roughly 1 million acres. In his current position, Dave has become an effective grant writer and received almost $400,000 in grants in his first year. He's very proud of his wife, Amber, and son, Cody, who are both real estate agents, and his daughter, Ashley, who's a two-time All-American tennis player, currently finishing her master's degree at Ohio State. I'm delighted to welcome our speaker today, Community Wildfire Mitigation Coordinator for the City of Scottsdale, Dave Ramirez.
Thank you so much, Max. I appreciate that introduction. Can everyone hear me okay?
Maybe better.
Yes, I think it might be a little bit better if you put your headphones on.
Okay.
Well, he's going to have his presentation.
Okay, is that better? How's that, Max?
Much better.
Okay,
Much
very
better.
good. Very good. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I really want to say thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to the Conservancy stewards. Ever since I started working with the city of Scottsdale, and especially the work that we're doing a lot of fire mitigation in Scottsdale. And a lot of the focus is in North Scottsdale and around the preserve. And that's a huge investment for the city of Scottsdale. And Max had touched on it a little bit. North Scottsdale especially is, both the state and Maricopa County through our Community Wildfire Protection Plan, they have both identified many of these lands in North Scottsdale to be at risk for high severity wildfire threat. And so we've seen that, I think everybody's aware of the fuel situations and just these large open space lands, not just the preserve, but also the postage stamps, as we call them, those school trust lands that the state has, and we've seen some fires, in relative close proximity to the city of Scottsdale. In 2019, the city of Phoenix had a fire on those school trust lands off of Cave Creek Road, and that fire was over 1,000 acres. And these large open space lands are surrounded by communities, thousands of homes, or sometimes tens of thousands of homes. And so to have fires in those environments, those large open space lands, it can be devastating. And we've been really fortunate that we've been able to stop those fires. But, in 2020, we saw multiple fires, in and around North Scottsdale, where we lost homes. And, in the 10 years that I worked on the Tonto National Forest as a South Zone division chief, it was rare for us to lose homes in a wildfire. In the last few years of my career before I retired, it became more commonplace, and which really, for me, it was really heightening my awareness that, these fires are getting worse. The fuel conditions are not improving at all, because we really weren't doing any kind of mitigation work in and around the municipalities, Scottsdale and Cave Creek and Carefree and Daisy Mountain and all these communities kind of that surrounded the valley, especially on the north end. But there was a lot of threat, and so when I came to the city of Scottsdale, that was one of the things that I talked to, my supervisor, Troy Lutrick, who's the head of emergency services for Scottsdale, and Tom Shannon, who's the fire chief. And I told him the city has a tremendous wildfire threat, and we need to do something to mitigate that threat. And they were very open to it. The city leadership was on board, when we talked about it. And really everyone has embraced the idea of doing some fire mitigation to protect these assets that we have in the city of Scottsdale. And, the Conservancy has been a great partner, and they're helping us with a lot of our work. And so it's been pretty remarkable in a short amount of time. We're getting a lot of really good work done, and it's really putting us on the map. There's a lot of communities in and around the greater Phoenix area that are looking at Scottsdale as a model. And that's pretty exciting. I really enjoy being a leader. And so that's kind of where we are. So let me share my screen, and then we can jump into the presentation. Let's see.
Perfect.
Okay, so we're going to talk. Well, I'm going to, a lot of the focus is just on some of the mitigation work that we're doing, and then why we have this threat, and then we'll kind of just talk about some different things that maybe we can do. The thing that I really don't go into a lot of discussion about is the ecology of where we are with all of our invasives. And I've got a friend, we actually did a statewide exercise yesterday, and the fire ecologist for the Tonto National Forest did a presentation. And she and a group of folks from the Tonto National Forest have made a video, and it talks a lot about the ecology of and where we are with our systems and the threat from these invasives. And I'll get that out to you guys, and you can maybe just look at the video. It's very informative, and at some point, if you would like to have Mary Lotta come and talk to, your group, then she's an amazing lady, a good dear friend. And it's just very, very enjoyable to listen to it. It's very insightful. So, okay. So these are some pictures that I took this year. These are the pictures that I took. I just wanted to run out so I could kind of show folks kind of what the thread is. And these pictures that I took were all on the preserve, so you can kind of see, the grass loading, and that's the primary carrier of our fires, and that's really ecologically our biggest threat. It's these invasives. 100 years ago, the Sonoran Desert didn't have all this grass. It looked very different. And so we can kind of see these, not only do we have grass, but, as Palo Verde grow up and the mesquite grow up and they die, and then we have these heavy fuels on the landscape. So, before we had all this grass, we also had these heavy fuels, but we just didn't have a lot of contiguous fine fuels that would allow fire to, burn from these heavy fuels, to heavy fuels, because there was just a break in that continuity. And so this picture, it's pretty representative of what we have out there on the landscape on the preserve. We have, heavy, dense, fine fuels. Most of this is the grass is red brome. We have, decadent, dead brush. We have, heavy fuels from the mesquite and Palo Verde that are out there on the landscape. And then we have saguaro, cactus, saguaro cactus, along with a lot of our other desert plants, they just don't handle fire very well. This is another picture, heavy fine fuels, and we have heavy deadened down. And then, you can see that grass and the brush and the trees, and we have what's called ladder fuels. So as the fire goes through the grass, then it gets in those fuels that are, touching the ground, those Palo Verde, the crowns come right to the ground, and then it gets into the Palo Verde, and then it just goes, as it goes up through the crown of the Palo Verde, it takes out the whole crown of the Palo Verde, and, it kills the plant. Well, it kills the mature plant, but, those Palo Verde will resprout. It just, you lose that mature characteristic, or, what we typically would think of, for the Sonoran Desert. It's awesome to see these more mature trees out on the landscapes, but we lose those, and they are an important, it's important to have them out on the landscape just for shade for wildlife. Another picture, a lot of heavy decadent brush on the site. Again, those are ladder fuels. A lot of times, if you have a saguaro or Palo Verde growing in right with them, as fire burns through there, it pretty much takes everything out. So that was the thing that I kind of talked to the department about, and I made a pitch to Croy and Scott, with the preserve management, and we talked about, how do we mitigate the threat of these fires, and I kind of told them, what we have is we have these roadways, and roadways typically are control features. So if we do have a fire and a fire comes to a roadway, usually, if there's not a lot of grass or there's not heavy fuels on the shoulders of the road, those roadways usually will stop a fire. But what we have now is that we have these really dense, heavy canopies of trees and brush along our roadsides, because, as we get rain, that water runs off that surface of the roadway and it pools up, along those shoulders of the roadway, and it holds moisture for a while, because our desert soil, water just doesn't percolate down in the desert very well. And so it runs off. But the shoulders of those roadways, when when you have water in a borrow ditch, it holds water for a while, and plants really like it. So, and we're not doing any treatments along those roadsides. So we get these heavy walls of fuel along the roadway. So when we have a fire, it gets into those heavy fuels, and the fires, we kind of, we know that now we have these ladder fuels, and they get into the crowns of the trees, and then the embers, are kind of, they get airborne, and then, if the wind's blowing out of the southwest, like, along Dynamite, and we get something on the south side of Dynamite, is this fire goes from the ground and gets into the canopy of those trees. Then those embers go over the top of the road, and then we get a fire on the north side of the road. And so those control features, our roadways, they're just not very effective holding features anymore. So when we kind of, like this picture that we have on 136, we see that heavy decadent, there's a lot of dead material in there. And when we thin that back, now that fire, it really doesn't have a mechanism for getting up into the crown of the fire, and that fire stays on the ground. And so for a fire truck, it shows up on scene, it's easy to stop the fire. And these are just more pictures of the project that we did last year. And that was the springboard for a lot of the work that we're doing on the preserve. We did from along 136, we did from Rio Verde Drive all the way to the Tano National Forest boundary, which was about 4.5 miles long. And so, this is the before and after photos of that. And our roadways, I would say that our roadways are probably, that's going to be the area where we have most of our starts off the roadways, because it'll be, careless smokers or somebody dragging a chain. When it's 115 degrees and we have all these heavy fine fuels, there's a lot of threat there, and it doesn't take much to start a fire. Like I say, somebody dragging a chain, you would think, oh, that doesn't happen. It does. It happens a lot. Or if somebody has a car on fire, because it's so hot, it overheats, and they pull off the roadway, and you've got all this fine fuel, all this grass. Now it's, the fire is in the grass, and it moves quite quickly. So what we're doing now is trying to mitigate that threat by removing those fuels. So just more pictures. This is the picture of the gate just north of the Granite Mountain Trailhead. So you kind of see that, the Palo Verde, we've taken out all of those ladder fuels. So it's clean underneath. So there just isn't that opportunity for fire to get into the crown. So not only is it protecting, that tree from losing the crown and dying, we're protecting that tree, but we're also reducing that threat of fire, getting those embers lofting over our roadways. And now those roadways are really more effective control features. So just more before and after, even protecting the brush. Some of the more mature brush, we can do that. And it, again, so we have this blacktop, somebody dragging a chain, that happens very easily to start fires that way. And we try to mitigate some of that during the summer by doing patrols with the fire department. And when we see people out there that are dragging chains, we try to stop them. And this is along, again, along 136 Montgomery Street, horse step, the horse step over there. And this is Barb's Trail, kind of more on that northern end of 136. This is down on Alaverde and Alavera. And we see the before and after photos. So this is really, I mean, what we're doing with our, this project was actually funded with a Maricopa County grant. They tend to be smaller grants, and like I say, this was just kind of the springboard for the projects that we're doing now. And then for me, it was a springboard. Once we got through this grant and we got through the work, then we looked at a larger grant through the Department of Forestry and Fire Management with the state of Arizona. And we put in for a Healthy Forest Initiative grant that we got. And that was for $350,000. So just more before and after photos. And you can kind of see along those roadways. I mean, that brush and a lot of that large dead debris, when you remove that, it really changes that landscape along the edge of those roadways. And this is getting out closer to Rio Verde Drive. And it's funny when we're doing those these treatments, we were doing some work this spring, and I had a neighbor that saw us out there doing this work, and she was quite upset, and she said that I was ruining the Sonoran Desert, and I didn't know what to say. I was really taken back by that. I said, well, I'm actually trying to protect the Sonoran Desert, and I'm trying to protect your community. And she didn't understand. She thought that, that this heavy fuel underneath the trees was important and would actually, keep the moisture levels higher under the trees, and that they needed that moisture. And I said, well, it's kind of just the opposite. The trees, the animals, they do need shade for sure. But, when it's 115 or 120 degrees, there's not a whole lot of moisture to be had. It all evaporates, and yeah, even when we have heavy dead decadent fuels, that moisture is gone off the surface, and it's sucked out of all of that, live vegetation and green vegetation. And it's kind of for the live fuels, it's kind of a natural process. And with our desert plants, they're very efficient. When we have, our monsoon season, those plants are very efficient at grabbing that moisture. They're because they know that they don't get a lot of moisture, so they really take advantage. Even when the humidities are high, they're very effective of grabbing moisture out of the air. And we see that even when we have a dry season, but we have high moisture in the air, those plants, they can harness that moisture out of the air. And you can see the leader growth in a lot of those plants, especially when you've seen a fire go through. And, that piece of ground that got burned, it may not have had any moisture, but you'll see the leader growth on a lot of the brush. It'll be, 2 to 3 feet in the course of, 6 months. And it's amazing. The vegetation, it's evolved with being able to do that. And so this is right off of Rio Verde Drive, but these heavy, large, this decadent, or, not decadent, but heavy fuels, and just the wall of fuel that's available. when we get fire into those, it burns very actively, and you can see that these roadways just are not good control features. And it's amazing. In 2020, when we had the bushfire, it got across the 87. The fire went from what I would say is, the way that the 87 is on that lower end. It got across the, well, it's funny there because there's a big turn there. So we'll say that it got from the west side of the 87 over to the east side. So it crossed 4 lanes of highway and the median. And it didn't take very long for that to happen. The fire wasn't getting a big head of steam, or, it wasn't big when it crossed the highway. So, those heavy fuels really do impact our ability to stop fire. So, once those shoulders are cleaned up, it really gives us a much better chance of stopping fire. So in 1995, and I don't know if a lot of folks were around in 1995, a lot of North Scottsdale was just starting to be developed. And so in 1995, we had the Rio fire, and it was a lightning fire, and it burned 22,000 acres. And that was, in a little over a 24-hour period. It was a lightning fire, and we get those outflow winds typically when we have these thunder cells that come through. And so that's always the danger, that we have outflow winds, because it really pushes that fire around. So 22,000 acres, we didn't lose any structures. And it's kind of neat now because we can go back and we can overlay that fire on the city of Scottsdale and on the preserve. And then we can kind of look at, how that changes things today, because, there weren't a lot of communities around in 1995. There were not a lot of buildings out there, a lot of residences built yet. And so now when we, overlay, the number of homes that are now on that footprint, if we had that same fire today, we would impact, over 450 homes and businesses. And, at that time, that was not yet designated as preserve lands. But, now we would have had over 5,200 acres of the preserved would have been burned. So, and a lot of that country, you can go back and look at that, and a lot of that area doesn't have saguaro on it now. They just don't handle fire very well at all. In 2020, we had the McDowell fire. It was actually on the county park. It was 280 acres. It was, again, it was a lightning fire. That blue line is actually the boundary with the preserve. And so it was less than a mile away from getting onto the preserve. And we were really fortunate, because when we got that fire, we also got a little bit of rain. And so, the fire was being pushed around by the wind, but, once it did its thing and we got a little bit more rain, we just kind of had a few spots that were still hot the next day, and we were able to get resources in there. And we really didn't want to let that fire, even the next morning, get ahead of steam, because it started burning actively in a couple parts of the fire. And we actually utilized the VLAT, and that's a very large air tanker, the DC-10, and we put a load of retardant down on each side of the fire and got it boxed in. And then we had a couple hotshot crews that we got in there, and we took care of the fire. And just that little amount of work, one drop out of the DC-10, and then a couple hotshot crews and some miscellaneous overhead for a few days, we spent $1 million. In 2020, we had the Ocotillo fire, and that was a fire again that really opened people's eyes. This was over in the Cave Creek area, and it started with a person that was actually out doing fire mitigation work on their own property with a weed whacker, with a weed eater. And so, a lot of folks would think, oh, you can't get a fire started from, a line trimmer. Well, you can. And so, a person trying to do the right thing, trying to take care of their own property, reduce fire hazard, and we lost 12 homes and 14 outbuildings. And, I think the final acreage on this fire was 700 or 800 acres. But, fire moves very quickly in this environment, in these fine fuel, in this fine fuel habitat, and fire, it's just like, say, grass and brush. It's one of those fuel models that's very dangerous. Things move real fast, but the fire burns through it, and 15 or 20 minutes after it burns through, you can walk around in it, because it burns out the grass off, and then it cools off very quickly. So I always like to display this. This was just the short amount of time I was on the Tonto National Forest from 2010 to 2020. So, and this is just the south zone of the Tonto. So this is were some of the lands that I was responsible for. So in that 10-year period, we burned about 500,000 acres. And of that, 500,000 acres, probably 2/3 of it were Sonoran Desert. So we lost, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of saguaro, and you don't get them back. It takes them a long time before they can even reproduce. I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 years before they, start to have fruit and can, and then that you get seed. And then that, the saguaro are just amazing. I mean, they're really tough to, for them in the natural environment to even be able to reproduce, because you got to have, a plant, like a bush, that nurse plant that can provide shade for that small seedling as it grows. So, you have to have just the right conditions, and the seeds have to fall in the right place. A lot of things have to happen to grow a saguaro, and then it takes them forever to get to be mature. And so, once we have fires in the Sonoran Desert and we lose saguaro, even if we somehow get some saguaro to show back up, it's really changing those, because the grass comes right back in. It loves disturbance, but this red brome, it doesn't require disturbance. Like a lot of invasive plants, they like disturbance. But red brome, just the way it works, there's a lot of seeds. It outcompetes the native grasses and shrubs. And so, it's really a bugger to try to control. And we don't have, outside of using pre-emergence, large scale, we just don't have any kind of control method. And, maybe at some point there'll be a biological agent or something that will make a difference. But right now there is nothing. So that threat, from those invasive grasses is not going away anytime soon. And we're losing a lot of our saguaro. And so this is, like I say, you see, these are lands all around the greater Phoenix area. This middle fire was the bush fire in 2020. This is the Woodbury fire. The Woodbury fire was 100,000 acres. The bush fire was a little over 200,000 acres. So these are huge fires, huge fires. In 2005, we had the Cave Creek complex. That started just within a mile of the Scottsdale jurisdictional boundary up in the north end. And so we've had huge fires. And that was another fire that was 260 or 70,000 acres. And it burned almost 2/3 of the Cave Creek Ranger District. It burned all the way from down here in North Scottsdale, all the way up to the Prescott National Forest. So, we talk about, how's the Sonoran Desert changed over the years? And, 100 years ago, this is what the Sonoran Desert looked like. We didn't have all the invasive grasses. We still had brush that was out here, and we still had fires. We would get a lightning. This is the Sonoran Desert and the area, excuse me, in Arizona. It's a very rich lightning environment, especially when we get into our monsoon season. We get a lot of lightning. And so we would have fires on the landscapes, but, we did not have these, giant mega fires. And so this is just a couple pictures that I took of red brome in the Sonoran Desert. And we kind of see this is how it gets its name. The picture on the right, we have that it has that red tint to it as it's starting to cure out. And then when it cures out, it has that golden color. And this is what I like to point out to folks. And this is why it's just such a bugger for native plants to compete with. Each seed head produces 75 seeds. And so it's I always call it like a cheatgrass on steroids. And when it burns, because the seed head's very big, it's a big seed head. And when it burns, it produces a lot of heat. So 1,000+ individual plants in 1 square meter produces 75,000 seeds per square meter. And that's a lot of seeds. And then the seeds remain viable throughout hot, dry periods. So hot weather doesn't kill the seeds. 2 to 9% remain viable for up to 2 years. So that's 1,500 seeds. Unlike cheatgrass, Bromus tectorum, red brome readily, invades undisturbed sites. So, and that's very different. A lot of weeds, they rely on that disturbance really to get established, but not red brome. Viability starts to drop off at about 6 months. So when there is a wet fall, germination potential is still very high. So in North Scottsdale, we talk about vulnerabilities. What are some of our vulnerabilities? And for us, these invasives are a real problem. And and it's not just the red brome. I mean, we see this on the preserve. We have a lot of fountain grass. And I don't know if folks have seen it, but on the preserve, we have pockets of salt cedar. And this is a pretty big patch of salt cedar that's just across the road on Pima. So we have the preserve. Well, it's probably 300 feet away from the preserve boundary. Now, salt cedar does like water, and the places that I've seen salt cedar along, like Pima, on the preserve, it's usually in washes. And then we also have buffalo grass, which was really problematic. And we have some big patches of buffalo grass on the preserve. And then globe chamomile has really come on, and on those wet years, it really is a problem. And we have areas in North Scottsdale up around Terra Vita and the boulders where globe chamomile is just thick, and there's a lot of it. There's a lot of it around the edge, the perimeter of the preserve as well. So those are some of our ecological threats that we have. And then, the other threats that we have are, we talk about, like, we have threats from especially new builds, when people are out there cutting and grinding, when people are building new homes. And we saw that in 2019 and 2020, where we had really wet springs. We had a tremendous grass crop, and all that grass. And then people would, we would have contractors that were out there cutting and grinding, and they would get sparks. And then next thing you know, we have a fire. And so doing more work around our communities, trying to keep those communities, kind of keep fire from coming into the communities, or the other way, to try to keep fires, if we had a fire start in a community, that it wasn't going right into the preserve, because those open space lands, especially on the south end of the preserve, there's not a lot of control features out there. So we really want to do a lot of that work around our communities to protect them and to keep fire from coming out onto our preserve lands. So our grants, our Healthy Forest Initiative, these are some of the project areas that we're working on. We know that over on the northeast side of the preserve, this 136th, we've done the length of that up to the Tonto National Forest boundary. And these are some of the other projects that, we'll be working around around Legends Trail up in the northwest corner. That's part of the Healthy Forest Initiative grant. There's a piece up here at the top that borders the Tonto National Forest, and the Tonto National Forest is a really good partner for us. And they're going to be treating the 3-mile stretch up on the north end of the preserve boundary for us. And that, I don't know if it'll start this spring or next fall, but they'll be working on that for us. This area down here south of Legends Trail Parkway along Pima, we've got the state that's been working on that, helping us out. And then we're also doing some work. Some of these dots, these kind of chartreuse colored dots that we have, they're actually water treatment facilities in the city. And we're doing fuels work around those to protect some of that critical infrastructure that we have. And then we're using those Healthy Forest Initiative dollars also to work with some of our communities that are Firewise communities, or that are in the process of becoming Firewise certified. And so we've got Cinquedados here between Lone Mountain and Dixoletta. We'll be working with that community to do some work along their perimeter. Then we're also doing work around these, we call them postage stamps, those the Arizona State Land Department lands, school trust lands. So the Healthy Forest Initiative is also going to treat around these postage stamps, more of that open space to protect those perimeters. This is a real small quarter section on the east side of Pima Road that we're working on. And then all of the Thompson Peak Parkway, the Rio Verde Drive, we're almost done with the south and north side of Rio Verde Drive. Then we'll be working on 128th, and then we'll be working around all of the trailheads on the preserve. So we're getting a lot of really good work done with that Healthy Forest Initiative grant. And, that's going to protect that border of our preserve. And then, we also are doing some work with Maricopa County. We're just getting started, just started today on the west side of Scottsdale Road all the way from Joe Max down to the 101. That's not even on the city of Scottsdale. That's not their jurisdiction. But this is a huge threat to us because we have predominant southwest winds, and we're afraid that we could get fire that pushes over onto these postage stamps. We have a large wash in there, rawhide wash, and our fear is that with those predominant winds, we could get a fire that wants to, get in that drainage and then burn right onto the preserve. So we're taking care of that, large chunk of Scottsdale Road as well through a Maricopa County grant. So this is, this is the Scottsdale Road project. And I just wanted to show this real quick. These are the fuel conditions. This was after last year's monsoon season. You can see how heavy the grass loading is. That vegetation comes right out onto the roadway. It's 50 miles an hour on Scottsdale Road. And we've got, we see the problem, that vegetation, there hasn't been any work done on the shoulders of the roadways. And we can see some of that critical infrastructure, the utility lines. We have like just this heavy, dense wall of fuel along the roadway. We have all of this heavy grass and brush, and we've got all this ladder fuel and going right into the crowns of all of the trees and brush. It's a wildfire nightmare out there along Scottsdale Road. So it'll be really good for us to get that area treated. But more heavy grass and brush. We just see it all along that roadway. And like I say, I just, when I look at this stuff, it's like, how come we haven't done anything prior to this? Just heavy dead and down right next to Scottsdale Road. And we can kind of see this, I think this is Portones on this side, and then right across the street, all this heavy dead and down and just a huge fire threat right off the roadway. And if we get somebody, a vehicle's on fire and you pull off the roadway, what's the potential? It's extremely high. And then not only that, we have all this heavy dead and down that gets into these drainages. So when we do have water, we get into our monsoon season and we have water flowing in these drainages, all this dead material that's in the drainages, it gets washed into probably a location where we have damming, and then it causes water to be diverted, and then once it goes overland, you don't know where it's going to go, and it can threaten communities. Last season we had a lot of problems. A lot of different communities had water issues. Water was being diverted, because of things like this, because there's just a lot of material in those drainages, and it causes a lot of problems with damming. So this is, again, Portones, and right across the street, this is Scottsdale. And when I was out there walking this, taking some pictures, and I was doing some flagging for the unit, there was a vehicle accident down here. And, that's just one of those things that happens. We have a vehicle accident, maybe a vehicle gets on fire, and now we have fire, in this large open space. This is, the side that's untreated, and right across the way we have, communities. So, look at the threat. It's very close. It's just across Scottsdale Road. And that's what I would say. People ask me what the greatest threat to the preserve is, and it's like, it's not the preserve itself. I don't think that there's a much lower probability of a fire start on the preserve, a person caused fire. The people that are out there utilizing the preserve, I think for the most part, are very, very responsible. It's all the roadways that are adjacent to the preserve, or it's those communities that live adjacent to the preserve that maybe, have a contractor doing work on the community, and they're doing cutting and grinding. the utility corridors, our utility partners are very good about maintaining those. They want to protect their assets, and so they're very good about doing fuels treatment projects. So more heavy grass brush along the roadway last season, and all of this stuff that you see in the picture, this is all cured out now, and it is ready to burn when we get into this fire season. Like say, when I look at this, it's just like, I always like to show this stuff. So when people drive along Scottsdale Road, after this, I'm sure they'll look at this, the roadway very differently. They'll be saying, oh my God, it's a fire hazard. And like say, this is kind of going towards the 101, and it's getting on, this is getting just almost onto the 101, but still the vegetation's growing, right out into the roadway. This is right before you get on the 101. And it's like, we just haven't been doing enough to mitigate the fire hazard along that roadway. So vulnerabilities to the preserve. Now we see that we have a lot of wildfire vulnerabilities just with the invasive grasses and all the roadways that are adjacent to the preserve. Ecological, we've got just a tremendous amount of invasive plants, especially that red brome. Flooding, is a real issue, especially post-fire. If we have a fire that burns with high severity and then we get a big rain event, it can really cause a lot of problems for us, because all of that decomposed granite, it is very susceptible to soil movement. And then, our weather is changing. I mean, it is getting hotter. Our fire seasons are longer. They start earlier, they go longer, and it's devastating when we don't get a monsoon season. It really causes a lot of problems for us as far as the threat of wildfires. And then, we do have a lot more growth in the valley, and that does affects everything. And then how do we mitigate the threats? It's, for me, it's pretty simple. We need to do more along those roadways to reduce that threat, because that's one of the biggest threats that we have. And we remove those ladder fuels, and we try to make those roadways a better control feature. Ecologically, we need to figure out a way to do more to deal with the invasive grasses and plants, and some of that, whether not everybody is a fan of using chemicals, but sometimes they're necessary, especially along those roadways, just using pre-emergence to stop those invasives from sprouting. And then flooding, just making sure that we can keep those channels free of debris. And then also we need to maintain effective alert systems for flooding. Global warming, we just need to make sure we have efficient and effective water systems, and we need to make sure we're protecting our utility infrastructure. And then population growth. And I don't even, it's kind of hard for me to address that, but, we just need to ensure that our infrastructure is in place to accommodate, population growth. And then I guess real quick, future opportunities for the Conservancy. And, I've thought about this a lot, grant support. There's opportunities for grants out there that we're not taking advantage of, and maybe we don't, maybe we don't necessarily have the capacity, or maybe folks aren't interested, but we've got tree grants, and I did reach out to the DFFM. They actually are the ones that host that grant, and they had told me that they would allow us to purchase saguaro and maybe do some planting of saguaro in areas that maybe we just don't have a lot of saguaro anymore. Invasive plant grants, where we can treat some of those invasives. and then, they have partnership grants and Healthy Forest Initiative grants. So a lot of opportunity for money out there. And then the other big one, and the Conservancy is already really helping us out a lot with this, is support for our Firewise program. We're using some of the staff and the Conservancy stewards to help us out with the Firewise program, doing Firewise assessments. And a lot of folks have, the folks that we're utilizing have gone through an assessor course. And so they've been a great asset for us. So subject matter expert support for critical work activities. This is kind of ongoing. A lot of the stewards are helping us out with weed spraying, some plant identification. I mean, you folks are just awesome at helping us out when we see some of these invasives, and trying to deal with these things before they become a problem. Photography work that with our Firewise assessors, folks are helping us out, and then some of the fire mitigation support. And that's where I would just make a little plug. If we have anybody out there that maybe has in their past life, if they knew how to do some, I would say like range work to be able to measure fuels, fine fuel loading, because some of the grants require us to do like pre and post treatment, documentation, and some of that work is trying to do pre and post fuel loads. So, I mean, there's always that, that's one of the things that I would really like to make a plug, if there's anybody out there that would want to help with some of that work. And then public education, it's so important for us to all reach out and try to educate our publics more about the threat of wildfire, and also just those vulnerabilities that we have, because there's an awful lot of communities that are right adjacent to the preserve, and folks are growing fountain grass, and there's just a lot of invasives in neighborhoods, and somehow try to get the word out that there's other things that you can plant that aren't going to be so won't be such a threat to our preserve, and it's just a huge investment for the community, and we just we don't want to create a problem, and so anyway, I think that's it. I took this picture the other day when I was out on the preserve at Tom's Thumb, and I just kind of neat when you see snow in the Sonoran Desert. So pretty cool. And that's
great.
That's what I have, Max. So
that's awesome. If
I went a little bit long, sorry about that.
No, that's good. If you want to stop sharing your screen, then we can see everybody again. But in the meantime, we do have a couple of questions. When we were talking before we started about the fact that over at Browns Mountain, they were, oops, now we lost your picture.
Well, I know, because I don't like looking at myself.
Oh, but we like looking at you. So over at Browns Mountain, they're doing a project, and we saw a helicopter delivering water that's going to be mixed with herbicides to help with the fight against invasive species. Was that part of a grant that you know
of? No.
Okay.
It was not part of a grant. It's actually being funded by APS.
Okay. Great.
And so they got some funding for APS for some. Well, I won't get into that because I don't know that it's my place. But APS is kind of funding it, and so they're taking care of some of those large. I think a lot of treatment of those buffalo grass patches, and so they're going to be doing some treatments out there, and so they were kind of getting some of that water in place, utilizing the helicopters.
Yeah, that was great. One question was, what was the year of the Oncala fire? Do you know?
I think that was 2020. Well, the Oncala fire. Where was that one? There was that over in
the question? You want to unmute yourself and clarify for Dave?
Yeah, this is Steve Coluccio. The Ancala fire started in the Ancala community on the southern side of the preserve and worked its way over the hill and into the preserve. And I was thinking somewhere in the early 2000s, but I'm really not sure. And we talk about it because we see the effects of the fire even today. So we talked to visitors about it, and it would be good to know what year that was. Does anybody know?
It's a mystery. Something.
I think Len Marcia said the other day when somebody asked him, it was around 1992.
Wow.
Yeah, they also call it the toilet paper fire.
Yeah, that one.
That's right. That's right. I have heard about that.
Fire.
Thank you. So another question we had is there anything that eats red broom or red broom seeds? You know, does it have a natural predator?
Well, Max, I think that's where we would like to go with those biological agents. There's a lot of things that, when I was living in Montana, I lived in Western Montana outside of Missoula, and that's the weed capital of the world. Oh, really? And, we had all kinds of weeds and the county didn't do a whole lot to treat those, but we did have some like their boll weevils or something like that because we had spotted knapweed that was really big problem for us, and there was like a weevil that they utilized as a biological agent, and then it would eat the seed, and it really did a nice job of eradicating the spotted knapweed. Now here, even in the valley, we've got the salt cedar. They have like a beetle as well, and it's doing a really nice job of eradicating some of that salt cedar, and it's very effective.
Well, that's great.
But the funny thing is, the problem is that, there's a lot of folks that, some of these species have really done a pretty nice job of, kind of their habitat has changed and they've evolved with it. Mm. And so now some of those like flycatchers, which are, I think they're a T&E species, but they've done really well in utilizing salt cedar as habitat. Mm. And now they're kind of wanting to stop, the eradication of it. And it's like, it's invasive. Let's get some of our native plants, our willows and things like that, repopulated back in those systems. Even now that there's a beetle in place, let's start doing those plantings so they can get established. So, but anyway.
One other question, that's a good one. Is there any program to prevent local nurseries from selling fountain grass or other invasive species?
I thought there was, and I'm relatively new to the Valley. I've only been here 10 years. And so, I'm not really sure if we can, if we can stop folks. I thought there was a program in place where they were really trying to stop that, but I'm not sure.
Okay. And also, Carrie looked it up. The Ancala fire was in 2009. So now we have the answer to that. Is there any recommended reading for anyone on desert fires and how to prevent them?
I'll tell you what, Max, I'm going to try to get that presentation from Mary Lotta and share it with you, because like I say, and I don't know that she had any references to books that folks can read, but Mary certainly would have some of that information, but I'll get that so you guys can look at it. It's a great presentation.
Okay, that's great. My husband Steve had a question.
So someone yesterday asked me about the helicopters at Browns Mountain and the use of the pesticides that they're going to use to help with the invasive species. Is there a risk of any kind to humans who are walking on the trails because of the amount of pesticides that they're using, or are they really not using a strong enough pesticide?
Well, Steve, to be quite honest with you, I mean, that's just not my specialty.
Okay.
And you know, for you guys, I certainly, I could put you in touch with Scott. He's much better at answering those questions. You know, I know that, you know, folks are very, sensitive to, you know, they have a lot of concerns about that. And, you know, I think that folks, you know, especially when we have these areas where we're trying to control a weed, it's like, you know, it's darn near impossible to try to do it by hand, you know. And so, you know, we're just trying to do what we can, and I think everybody cares, you know, about the preserve a great deal. But like say, the chemical side of it, I'm just not, you know, I'm not very knowledgeable about the chemical side of it, of our treatments.
Okay, we had a comment here from Paul Staker, who's very involved in the invasive species project. And he said, the risks for using the herbicide, oh, Paul Staker would know. I'm sorry, I thought he was answering us. Okay, well, we'll try to get that information to everyone. Okay, we kind of ran over time, and I apologize, but I think we could stay here all day and talk. So Dave, thank you so much for this very important information. You know, I live in Legend Trail, and I know they did a big Firewise program. There was a day I looked out at the wash behind my house, and I didn't know it, but there were houses behind there. But before they did their project, the vegetation was so dense, I didn't even know that there were houses behind my house. So they're doing a good job there.
Yeah. And one thing I would say is that, you know, because a lot of people don't know it, but when you get that certification for your community for Firewise, make sure you reach out to your homeowner's insurance, because a lot of homeowners insurance will give you a discount.
Really?
Yes. Yep. I know. And I have USAA, and I think they give a 10 or 15% discount for Firewise communities. So there's some incentive, you
It's
know.
great. It's
Yeah.
great. Yep. Thank you so much. This was wonderful information. Lots that I didn't know of. And you're right. I'm not going to look at the side of the roadway the same ever again. So thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise with us.
Yeah, Max. And, you know, if you could make sure, if any of the stewards or, you know, want more information, give them my cell number. It's
Great.
my personal cell number. I love to talk to folks. And you guys are such a great asset. I really want to thank you again for all the great work that you do, for caring so much for, you know, the preserve. It's an awesome resource to the city of Scottsdale.
That's great. Thank you so much, Dave. Thank you everyone for joining us. Hope we'll see you all again, same time, same place on March 24th, when Steve Jones is going to tell us all about this wildflower season. Have a great day, everybody.
You too.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Dave.